A big debate this week for the GOP. Where does the race stand now? Syndicated columnist David Limbaugh will analyze, and he'll share his new book, The Emmaus Code. And later, the National Catholic Register's Edward Penton will offer his thoughts on the ongoing saga surrounding the issue of divorced and remarried Catholics and the sacraments. Are changes coming in the year of mercy? He'll tell us, and much more. The World Over Live begins right now.
Now, from Washington, D.C., Raymond Arroyo.
A warm welcome to all of you joining us in the United States and the world over. David Limbaugh and Edward Penton are both straight ahead. We also have a preview of a new film for you that you might want to check out. If you'd like to comment on tonight's show, or if you have a question, I'll be live tweeting throughout. Find me on Twitter at Raymond Arroyo, or you can email me at worldover@ewtn.com. Here's the brief news from the world over this week. Hundreds of Syrian Christians have gathered from across the nation in a desperate bid to defend one of the last Christian enclaves from ISIS. Since the end of October, Islamic State militants have driven thousands from their homes in and around the western Syrian town of Saddad. But the Christian fighters have thus far prevented the jihadists from advancing to the city center. Syrian Orthodox Patriarch Ignatius Oprim II visited Saddad recently to encourage the Christian fighters to defend their homeland. Meanwhile, a little bit of good news. ISIS released 37 Christians who were kidnapped in February, most of them elderly men and women. They were among 253 Christians taken in an ISIS sweep through the region. Negotiations for the release of more hostages are currently underway. More than the English Channel is dividing Great Britain from the rest of Europe these days. With the threat of an Anglo exit, Prime Minister David Cameron laid out his government's demands for European Union reform and a more flexible UK membership. Among the provisions outlined on Tuesday, Cameron is calling for the EU to cede power from a growing central government in Brussels back to its member states. He's insisting that the UK be allowed to control its immigration policy by restricting benefits of other EU nationals. He's also seeking financial reforms and UK protection from the liability of a potential euro crisis. More fundamentally, Cameron stressed that Britain wanted a clear, legally binding and irreversible exemption from the EU's mission for an ever closer union.
That will mean Britain can never be entangled in a political union against our will or be drawn into any kind of United States of Europe. We don't believe in it. We do not subscribe to it. We have a different vision for Europe.
Cameron acknowledged that getting the other 27 nations to agree to Britain's goals would be a major challenge, but not mission impossible. The European Commission had a different view, calling some of the issues raised by Cameron highly problematic. Britain will hold a referendum by the end of 2017 on whether to remain a part of or leave the EU. And lawmakers in Germany's parliament have approved euthanasia. Assisted suicide in Germany had previously been a gray area of the law, which was neither allowed nor banned. Not anymore. The measure, which was passed by a wide margin, would permit doctor-assisted suicide for, quote, altruistic reasons. However, the commercialization of the practice has been banned. Critics of the new law fear that the parameters of assisted suicide could expand in time. Back in Washington, D.C., the U.S. Supreme Court announced that it would take up a challenge to Obamacare's contraceptive mandate from religious nonprofit groups, including the Little Sisters of the Poor. The case is similar to that of last year's landmark Hobby Lobby decision, where the High Court ruled that closely held for-profit companies are exempt from the mandate, should its owners have a religious objection. Arguments are expected to be heard in March. A decision would likely come down June of next year. And another legal setback for President Barack Obama on immigration. By a vote of 2-1, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals agreed with Texas and 25 other states who claimed that the president's executive actions to shield 5 million undocumented immigrants from deportation was illegal and would burden the states to provide them with benefits. The court panel rejected the White House argument that the executive actions merely shift the enforcement priorities of the existing law. Administration lawyers said the president will appeal the case to the Supreme Court. The justices could take up the issue during the court's current term. And immigration was front and center at the Republican presidential debate on Tuesday, with some bright lines of division being drawn among the candidates. Texas Senator Ted Cruz rued that illegal immigration is driving down the wages of American workers. He rejected those who characterize his insistence on legal immigration as being somehow anti-immigrant. He and Donald Trump continued to call for the deportation of those in the U.S. illegally. Ohio Governor John Kasich and former Florida Governor Jeb Bush both rejected that idea as impossible. More on the GOP debate and the fallout later in the show. And 2 Italian journalists who published confidential Vatican financial information could be prosecuted by church authorities. Holy See spokesman Father Federico Lombardi announced on Wednesday that the Vatican is investigating Gianluigi Nusi and Emiliano Fittipaldi, who last week released 2 bombshell books revealing alleged waste, greed, and mismanagement at some of the highest levels of the Vatican bureaucracy. Much of the information was dated. The books were based on leaked documents from Pope Francis's Financial Reform Commission. 2 members of that commission have already been arrested by Vatican police in connection with the leaked documents. And Pope Francis made 2 more major bishop appointments in Europe this week. Bishop Juan Jose Omaya becomes the next Archbishop of Barcelona, Spain, and Bishop Joseph de Kessel takes over as Archbishop of Brussels in Belgium. Archbishop Omaya, who has been called the Maradiaga of Spain, that's a reference to Pope Francis's top lieutenant, Cardinal Oscar Maradiaga, who advances a progressive outlook for the Church. As for Archbishop de Kessel, asked about gay people, he said, "I have much respect for gays, including their way of living their sexuality." He also said that women's ordination is negotiable. Both archdioceses are typically cardinalatial sees. Put that smartphone away when you're eating dinner. That was Pope Francis's message to families during his Wednesday audience. Continuing his weekly catechesis on family life, the Pope said Christians have a special vocation to foster family closeness, which is manifested at the dinner table. Moving off script, he said, a family that rarely eats together or spends their meals staring at smartphones or the TV is hardly a family. That, he said, is a hotel. He bemoaned the end of the family meal, a great symbol of togetherness, disappearing in some societies. The Pope stressed that the dinner table is the place where Christ chose to teach his disciples. And a true American hero received the nation's highest military honor on Thursday. Florent Groberg received the Medal of Honor from President Obama during a ceremony in the East Room of the White House. Groberg was a U.S. Army captain in 2012 when he tackled a suicide bomber in Afghanistan. 4 people died in the attack, but he saved the lives of many more. Groberg spent 3 years in recovery. His left leg, badly damaged, necessitated 30 surgeries. Ahead of the ceremony, Groberg said he's accepting the award to honor the men who died next to him.
You know, that's what we need to talk about. That's the guys that, you need, the true heroes in all this. It's the guys that didn't make it. I'm here. I'm talking to you. I'm telling the story, and you know, they want to, you know, give me a medal for it. Medal doesn't belong to me. It belongs to those 4 guys. Medal that belongs to those 4 families.
This being the week we honor our veterans, a special thank you to Captain Groberg and all the men and women and their families who've sacrificed to protect our freedoms. Thank you all. When we return, Republicans had what many are calling the most substantive debate of the season. But who profited from the debate? David Limbaugh will tell us and expose where to find Jesus in the Old Testament. The World Over Live continues in a moment. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over Live. For many, the Old Testament is a pretty intimidating collection of histories, poems, genealogies, and laws that have been superseded by the New Testament. Not so fast, says my next guest. His latest book has been 20 years in the making. It sets out to demonstrate the Christ-centeredness of the Old Testament. It's called the Emmaus Code, Finding Jesus in the Old Testament. But first, from God to Mammon. The Republicans had a debate this week that could redefine the race for president. To get into all of this, we're joined by columnist and author David Limbaugh. David, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Pleasure to see you again. The Fox News debate, GOP debate, got underway on Tuesday, and there was no lack of fireworks between these candidates. I want to roll this for you. This is Senator Marco Rubio and Senator Rand Paul on military spending and its limits. Listen.
How is it conservative to add $1 trillion in military expenditures? You cannot be a conservative if you're going to keep promoting new programs that you're not going to pay for.
I know that Rand is a committed isolationist. I'm not. I believe the world is a stronger and a better place when the United States is the strongest military power in the world.
David Limbaugh, did Rubio help himself or hurt himself in that exchange?
Immeasurably helped himself on that particular issue, or I should say, hurt Paul. Paul hurt himself. Rubio's right. The conservatives are not shy about spending money on defense. Libertarians are, and Paul, of course, is the son of a libertarian, tries to act like he's not a libertarian. By the way, this isn't a cut to Rand. I like Rand personally. I love his budget hawkism, but when he says, how is it conservative to spend a lot on, it is conservative, it's constitutional. That's one of the few things the Constitution contemplates the federal government spend money on. We've got to be protected. And by the way, the real beneficiary of that exchange was Ted Cruz.
How so?
Because he came and said, it costs a lot to spend money, but imagine the cost if we don't defend ourselves.
I have to get into immigration, which was really front and center much of the night, the stalking horse really throughout this entire debate. This is...
And campaign.
And campaign. This is Donald Trump and Governor John Kasich of Ohio really mixing it up. Watch.
We're a country of laws. We either have a country or we don't have a country.
Come on, folks. We all know you can't pick them up and ship them back across the border. It's a silly argument. It's not an adult argument.
12 million illegal immigrants to send them back, 500,000 a month, is just not possible. And it's not embracing American values. And it would tear communities apart. And it would send a signal that we're not the kind of country that I know America is.
David Limbaugh, you heard Jeb Bush there. Who was the victor in this exchange? Trump laying out this very tough stance. The wall's got to go up, and we'll talk in a moment about how he advanced that. And Kasich and Bush saying, this is inhumane, this isn't adult.
Well, those two are in the wrong party on that issue. And I think you and I talked about this off camera. I think Trump has awakened the base on this immigration issue. And that's why he's got to keep pushing it. Yeah, some of the rhetoric's a little harsh, and some of the talk is a little questionable. But the Kasich and Bush, on the other hand, are way off the reservation the other way. I love Jeb Bush as a person. I love the Bushes as decent people. But their idea, this compassionate conservative idea, is coming through. I have always resented that. Conservatism is compassionate. We just believe we help people in a different way.
But doesn't the Trump rhetoric hurt the image of the party?
Well, that's what they say, but I think we can't worry too much anymore about that. We've got to be who we are, and we have to show leadership, and we have to show we believe in our ideas, or we'll never ignite our own people. The Democrats never worry about playing to the center, and Romney, by the way, carried independents, and we still lost. We have to be raking conservatives, and we will win this election. If we are liberal light, we lose.
I want to play this for you. This is Donald Trump really upping the ante on immigration on Wednesday. He told Joe Scarborough about his new deportation force. Listen.
You're going to have a deportation force, and you're going to do it humanely, and you're going to bring the country, and frankly, the people, because you have some excellent, wonderful people, some fantastic people that have been here for a long period of time. Don't forget, Mika, that you have millions of people that are waiting online to come into this country, and they're waiting to come in legally.
David, you hear Mr. Trump there talking about his deportation force. He claimed Truman did this. Eisenhower did it, deported millions of people. There was no problem.
Yeah. Well, we don't live in those times, and boy, that would be something, wouldn't it? As strongly as I feel about immigration, I don't see that happening, but I do think it's getting old that nobody ever follows up on enforcing the border. The truth is the Democrats don't want to enforce the border. They want people in, not just, and let me say something that may sound cynical, not just to win votes and to flood America with people, the demographics, so that they'll win. You've seen Mark Stein's work about how they can win even without voters by changing the demographics and the population. I think they don't believe in the American idea.
They who? The Democrats?
No, the Democrats. They don't believe in the American idea. We conservatives believe in the Constitution. We believe in instilling American values in would-be citizens. That's why we go through the naturalization process, and we ensure ourselves they know about the basics of our government. The liberals don't care about the basics of our government. That's why they don't have any problem with the Supreme Court totally trampling the Constitution. They can say that's cynical, but it's a fact. We see it every day. So we care about preserving our sovereignty, not because we're nativists, not because we're ethnic. We're a mixture ethnically. It's because we believe that America is great because of it's built on an idea of liberty grounded in the Constitution.
I want to play something else for you. This is Ben Carson, one of the front runners. He and Donald Trump are really neck and neck in the polls. Wednesday, Carson got specific, outlining a plan for registering illegal immigrants. Watch.
I propose that we give them a 6-month period in which to register. If they don't register within that 6-month period, they're criminals and are treated as such. But if they register in that 6-month period and they have a pristine record and they wish to be guest workers in this country, they would have to pay a back tax penalty, and they have to continue to pay taxes going forward. Now, that does not give them the right to vote. It does not make them U.S. citizens.
How does that play in the Republican Party?
That's interesting. Now, that's different than I thought, because he didn't there articulate a path to citizenship. Now, he may have in a different soundbite. I don't know. He's
talking about workers' permits,
right?
A working permit, but the way he's phrased it, a guest worker program, and legalized immigrants could apply for citizenship at some point. But he's very vague on that.
Yes, Ted Cruz last night made a point that nobody, to my knowledge, in any of these debates and any of this discussion so far has made, and that is that a lot of these workers are coming in and undercutting American workers. And he said, and this was poignant, just such class debating, he said if a bunch of accountants and lawyers were coming across the Rio Grande, there'd be entirely different posture. And his point is, really, we do see workers coming in and undercutting, and it's not fair when they're not legal doing that.
What is the Ben Carson appeal? You're literally in Middle America,
yes,
in Missouri. What is the attraction here?
I think several things.
People here can't figure it out in Washington.
I think several things. They're so tired of politicians. That's not just a cliche. They really are, because obviously Washington has brought us disaster. We're talking $19 trillion of national debt. We're talking of $100+ trillion of entitlements and no prospect of reforming. So we're headed toward bankruptcy. We have ISIS on the march, and we have our social values. So all three legs of the Reagan stool of conservatism, social, economic, and foreign, are in the toilet. We face multiple existential threats, and we don't have any prospect to stop any of them in our current posture. Ben Carson stands for a restoration of traditional values. He's a strong Christian. People trust him. That's why they're trying, the liberals, the media is trying to undercut him where he's strongest, which is his credibility, which, by the way, is backfiring so far. Yeah. And he's got a freshness about him. He's got an innocence about him. Yes, he's not sophisticated about political issues despite his genius in medicine. But I think some people find that refreshing. He comes off as a little naive in some of
Well, that's my question. Does he have the experience to govern? Let's face it, one can be very accomplished in all manner of American life. To run a bureaucracy, oversee a team this sprawling, this large, in the greatest country in the world, is quite a task. Is he up to it? Is Ben Carson up to it?
I think he's up to it, but in a different way. I think he would have to delegate. My concern would be that it's not his ability to manage and all that. It's his being versed on some things, for example, constitutional issues. When he made a comment the other day that we could, and I'm paraphrasing, and this may be wrong because I want to be fair to him because I love the guy, but something about we want to keep propaganda out of the academia or an educational system. How are you going to do that? Well, we have a board. Well, then you can't have a board assessing speech. And I don't think, if he thought through that, if he'd been mentored, but he hadn't been steeped in this stuff, even like you and I have. He's been in the operating room. He's more brilliant than I'll ever hope to be, but he hasn't been steeped in this long enough. And so those kind of things, I think, give people the wrong idea, and I think he needs to learn those things.
Many said Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz were the standouts of this night.
Yes.
I want to play Ted Cruz. Again, talking about the limits on immigration, and anyone suggesting that there be limits is branded as anti-immigrant. Senator Ted Cruz.
And I will say, for those of us who believe people ought to come to this country legally and we should enforce the law, we're tired of being told it's anti-immigrant. It's offensive. I am the son of an immigrant who came legally from Cuba to seek the American dream.
Ted Cruz, again, a brilliant debater and very articulate. How does he stack up? How can he find room in this mix? You have the blockade of Trump and Carson really gobbling up all of Ted Cruz's base at this moment.
I just wrote about this, interestingly, today for my column.
I didn't peek, I promise.
No, it's on the train on the way over. It's not even out yet. And by the way, I loved him. He just said what I said in a different way about the nativism. I'm sick of being accused of being a nativist because I want to enforce the borders. I'm an Americanist. I don't care who comes in. We're all different colors. That's not the point. We're not anti-immigrant. We want people to enforce to embrace the American idea. And we don't want unruly, unlawful immigration into our country. You can't remain a nation if you don't control and manage your immigration. Look at Rome, et cetera, et cetera. But Cruz is a brilliant debater. He has been, I think, kind of a stalking horse for Trump. He hasn't want to offend Trump. And he, like I do, appreciates Trump taking on the establishment, even if he doesn't agree with them on a lot of things, probably, although he's not going to say it. I see Trump and Rubio at one level in the debate. I mean, in the race, and in terms of support, they're here, and Carson and Trump are up here. But these two, their support might be soft because it's not based on. Well, Trumpites would get furious at me saying this. I can't say it's not based on policy because it is. Trump has called the establishment out. He's gone after them.
I mean, it's a campaign of immigration and trade.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's built on those two issues, right?
Yes, it is. And I'm not a protectionist, by the way, and that's part of his repertoire I don't like. But Trump, you could see everybody thinks he's going to implode because he's kind of a wild card man. But no, and I see him actually evolving as more mature as a candidate. You see at each debate, he's less bombastic and less offensive to people. He called Carly out a little bit, but she had it coming a little bit too for interrupting. And I like her, by the way. And so And Ben Carson, well, they're going after him, and he's not, like you say, he's not experienced. So everybody's thinking that could be soft support. Trump's definitely, but the other two are so solid. I think eventually they're going to pick at each other. And in the process of picking each other, they don't want to pick at the big guys because they're both, their supporters will resent it. Cruz and they've been in the process of picking on each other. They'll come in through the side door, phrase you look, and they'll indirectly be going after the others. Then they're hoping these other two, one or the other, will implode. Then they'll sneak in there, and eventually it'll be one-on-one. But I do see Trump versus Cruz, and Trump versus Carson and Cruz versus Rubio. Don't you? That's the way the race is shaping up.
So you think it's going to be establishment versus this outsider? When it's all over, is that how it shakes out?
No, I'm not sure.
No.
But I did say that, but am I going to stick to me saying that since I just came up with it on the fly? I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah.
While you think about that,
yes.
I want to show you this undercard debate. This was the debate before the main event. Louisiana Governor Bobby Jindal took on New Jersey Governor Chris Christie for not doing enough to fight Obamacare. Watch.
Chris, look, I'll give you a ribbon for participation and a juice box, but in the real world, it's about results. It's about actually cutting government spending, not just talking about cutting government spending.
Yep. Governor Jindal, thank you.
Yeah, listen, we've stopped Obamacare in New Jersey because we refuse to participate in the federal exchange. But here's the bigger issue. What do you think is going to happen when Hillary Clinton's elected president of the United States? The woman who tried to impose health care on this country over 20 years ago, and she was stopped then by a strong group of Republicans and an American public that said no thank you.
There he is, Chris Christie. My take here, watching this race, watching how this shapes up, it seems as if Christie could be the dark horse for either the establishment or maybe he takes that Trump base.
It
could go either way.
You listen to yourself. It's fascinating what you just said, because therein you revealed that he's malleable, which is the thing that makes him unattractive in the end. Yeah, he's very attractive. He seems like one of us, but he seems like one of them too. So in the end, you can't trust. I don't want to say I can't trust, but I'm not too enamored with him with the big bear hug with Obama. And plus, he's a little too snarky. I mean, it's, always do. But I do appreciate some things about him. But what's more fascinating about than that is that just last night, I was talking to someone in another green room, won't mention a competition, and she said to me the exact same thing. She's, the more I can't stand Christie, but I find myself starting to like him. And she's, I think I could maybe go for him. So I knew you were insightful and prescient, but that's pretty interesting, is it not, in the last 2 days?
No, he impressed in that smaller debate. He really stood out, and he is doing something interesting. He's not fighting with the guys next to him. He's taking on Hillary Clinton. We heard it at the end of that fight.
And I think Jeb tried to do that last night, and I admired him for it, and I feel sorry for Jeb. It's just not his time.
Is he done?
I think he's done.
Chris, what about Kasich? Done?
Way done, like burnt to a crisp.
Okay. Well, now we go.
Is he a Catholic? I'm in trouble if he's a Catholic.
No, I don't know where he is. I think he was Catholic. He's no longer Catholic.
Good, okay.
I'm not
he's
sure.
Totally burned.
That's
like
okay.
Double burned.
Look, we are equal opportunity truth tellers.
I know.
Doesn't matter what your faith. We're telling it like it is.
Yeah.
Okay. I need to move now to the book, The Emmaus Code. First of all, you seem to be, this could just be my impression, moving away from the political stuff we've just been discussing for the last few minutes. You're focusing on faith more and more in these books. Your last book, Jesus on Trial, was, again, looking at the scriptures, trying to prove the case for Jesus. Are you leaving politics behind?
No, I'm still going to do my 2 columns a week, and I may go back to political books, but I sure am gratified by doing this kind of work. And I've always loved studying the Bible, and I can't believe I'm actually doing it as a quasi-profession here, where I'm actually doing, it's like work, and I'm, man, before I've always felt like it's a jealous mistress. I'm studying it, but I ought to be doing my work.
Right.
Now it's part of my work, and how cool is that?
Well, you feel the passion for this.
Oh, absolutely.
And the last one.
Yeah, absolutely.
Tell me, that story of Jesus on the road to Emmaus really is the lock here, the key that unlocks the central thesis of the book, which is Jesus can be seen, found in the Old Testament.
The key to unlocking all of Scripture is through Jesus, and understanding that he is foundational and central to the Old Testament, as you said in the intro. Yes. So it's kind of a play on words. Da Vinci Code, Emmaus Code, mysterious cover, the genius artists at Regnery. I love that cover. I'm so proud of it. I can't take credit for it. But the Emmaus Road is the biblical story. Yes.
Where Jesus is walking with his apostles, and what's the key here?
Yes. And they're walking along despondent, dejected, after Jesus died. And 3 days before he's crucified, he didn't deliver and redeem Israel for militarily and politically. They anticipated that out of their Messiah. And he just died without so much as a whimper. And he's gone. He's gone from the tomb, but they don't get the significance of that. So he walks up to them, starts walking along, he just appears out of thin air, I guess. And what are you guys talking about? What's wrong? And they go, are you the only one in the whole world who doesn't know what happened to Jesus? And of course, he is Jesus. But they're made not to recognize him, the Scripture said. So he then takes them through the entirety of Scripture and shows, which was only the Old Testament, because that's all Scripture was at the time, and shows how that all points to him. And then after he vanished again, they said talking about it, didn't our hearts burn within us as he unveiled himself to us? Isn't that just moving? Their hearts, but what better way to describe how much that moved them?
Let's talk for a moment about, many look at the Bible and they say, you know, we've got the New Testament. This supersedes the Old. Why do I need that? I've got Jesus right here.
Yes.
You would say what?
I'd say that is so unfortunate that they have that idea. But I'm glad that you acknowledge that many do think that, because that's really one of the reasons I wrote the book. People underappreciate the Old Testament. They're intimidated by it. And what they need to understand is that it's foundational to the New Testament. I have scores of quotes from people, from scholars who say, but for the Old Testament, they wouldn't understand or appreciate that. Then there's a couple of things I want to talk about on that. Two things. One, I had my own Emmaus Road epiphany. The way I came to Christ was ultimately, I mean, I used to be a skeptic, as I talked about in the other book. And notice I won't mention the name of the other book because I don't want to compete with the present book, being the mercenary capitalist I am. And I eventually, I mean, I kept studying and I believed eventually the truth claims of Christianity, but what finally got me over the tipping point was the messianic prophecies, the unbelievably meticulous, detailed prophecies that were fulfilled specifically in Jesus. So I had that, I came indirectly through the Old Testament, and so I think other people can do the same thing. But I think the Old Testament is intimidating, so this is a primer. I go through Old Testament history and summarize it, because I think that's, if you get a feeling of the flow of the story, which is real history, it's not all of history, it's salvation history, God intervening with mankind in actual history. You get a better feel of that, then you'll have a better feel of the message and you'll understand it. So the other thing, though, and I'll hurry, the critical point about the Old Testament is, we needed the law. Paul says that the law was our guardian, bringing us to Christ. The law was holy because it was made by a holy God, a perfect God. But we are inadequate to live up to it. We can't get there on our own merits. It shows us our desperate need for a Savior because of our depravity.
The law is our
guardian.
Guardian. I love that line. You talk about the need for a moral compass, a resetting of the moral compass.
Yes.
How does the Old Testament reset the moral compass?
Well, they asked me about, well, how does this relate? Some people ask me, how does this book relate to what's going on in the culture? And I said, well, it refocuses us on the traditional values, Judeo-Christian values, and no more than any other book like this. But when they ask me, and it's not a book about the culture, it's not a book about politics, it's not a book urging us.
It's exegesis. It really
is. It's just religious and faith. That's all it is.
It's Old and New Testament.
That's it.
It's seeing the reflection of one in the other, and vice versa. One of the things I want to explore with you for a moment. When people see this, they hear the Emmaus Code and finding Jesus in the Old Testament, they assume everything they're going to find here is basically Old Testament prophecies and how they reflect in Jesus. You found something else, though.
Oh, yeah. In fact, I did discuss the prophecies in the other book, not to be named. And
the book that dare not say its name.
And I discussed it in some detail. And I again reiterated them here because I wanted this to be a comprehensive book. But I didn't really want to focus on those because everybody now pretty much knows about those. And so there's other, but I had to include them. But there's a host of other things, such as the major biblical covenants of the Bible, which I find so fascinating and involved and integrated, and all find their culmination in Christ. It's God's redemptive, His promise of redemption that He makes from the beginning of time. In fact, can I mention that at the very time God administered judgment on Adam and Eve, at the very time to show what a God of love and grace He is, He made His first announcement of the gospel in Genesis 3:15. He says, and by the way, when I used to read apologetics and they said that was a messianic prophecy, I didn't. You guys are stretching it. That's absurd. Well, I didn't understand why. Now I understand why, and I try to explain it. He's talking to the serpent, God is, and says, I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. The seed of the woman. It has to be Jesus. He was the only one ever born of a woman but not of a man, born of the Holy Spirit. So that's Jesus, and Paul affirms it in Galatians 4:4, that he's talking, Christ is the seed of the woman. Now, he shall bruise your head, talking to Satan. If you injure somebody's head, that could be a fatal blow. So he's going to kill Satan, and you shall bruise his heel. So what? You get a sore heel. So Satan's going to be allowed to injure Christ. But guess what's even more goosebump-esque than that? Christ allows him to injure him. Christ voluntarily goes to the cross, but in the very process of allowing Satan to injure him, he kills Satan, because by going to the cross, he defeats Satan, sin, and death, and we can live through faith in him.
In our last minute here, how has this changed you personally? It's obvious. This has lit something within you, this exploration.
I really think that there are so many riches in the Old Testament. And when you understand the messianic threads and the themes that are undercurrents through the Old Testament, and you see how it's all integrated, how God promised there in Genesis, He does it again by calling out the nation of Israel, forming the nation, making them a nation of priests to bring us ultimately the gospel and Jesus Christ, to have the law so that they will become a holy nation of priests, mediate that, become perfect, holy, and then deliver us the Messiah. So it's like an hourglass. It starts out in the Bible, it applies to all people in creation. Then it narrows its focus to the little tiny nation of Israel. Then that little nation goes through for 1,500 years, and it explodes out again by offering the gospel to the entirety of mankind. To see that whole picture is such a profound realization. It's a wonderful thing, I think. Not trying to be corny, but it's a fact.
Oh, thank you so much for being here. And for the book, The Emmaus Code, Finding Jesus in the Old Testament by David Limbaugh, is available at bookstores everywhere and online. You can find more information about David and read his columns at davidlimbaugh.com. When we return, is Pope Francis indicating where he means to take the issue of communion for divorced and remarried Catholics? We'll ask the National Catholic Register's Vatican correspondent, Edward Penton, when The World Over continues. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over. There is a lot of news to share and decode for you from Rome this week. To do so, we're joined by phone by the Vatican correspondent for the National Catholic Register, author of The Rigging of a Vatican Synod, Edward Penton. Ed, thanks for being here. You reported this week on a piece by Father Antonio Spadaro. Now, this Jesuit priest is an intimate of the Pope, a confidant, ghostwriter, a regular defender of Pope Francis. In fact, he and the Pope were often seen together, entering and exiting the Synod a few weeks ago, which makes Father Spadaro's column in the Jesuit magazine he edits, La Civiltà Cattolica, all the more interesting. This week, he wrote that sections 84 to 86 of the final Synod document laid the groundwork for civilly remarried divorcees to receive communion. To give you a fuller background, here are excerpts of the paragraphs Spadaro cites. We'll put it up on full screen. While upholding the general norm, it's necessary to recognize that the responsibility of certain actions or decisions is not the same in all cases. Pastoral discernment, taking into account of the correct formed consciences of people, must take up these situations. Going on, it says, the path of accompaniment and discernment orients these faithful to an awareness of conscience of their situation before God. Conversation with the priest in the internal forum, confession, contributes to the formation of a correct judgment on what places an obstacle to the possibility of a fuller participation in the life of the church. Edward Penton, first of all, why is Spadaro's word so important here, his column? Even though many Synod Fathers have stressed that the final document in no way opens a door to sacraments for the divorced and remarried.
Well, it's really, as you said earlier, Raymond, that he is a very close sort of confidant of the Pope. He's a Jesuit, as we know, and he's often advising the Pope on sort of media matters as well as other things. And to have him say this, some people think because of his closeness to the Pope, he's basically sort of being a spokesman for the Pope and putting out the Pope's ideas. And what's controversial about this is that he's saying, you know, that the Synod actually opened a door to communion for divorced and remarried, and that it's laid the foundations for such an innovation. And that, of course, as viewers will know, is very problematic because that's been obviously opposed by many people. And it's for good reason. And so by saying this, somebody said the Pope is probably sort of he's sort of throwing ideas up a flagpole to see who salutes. He's sort of flying a kite and seeing who is going to sort of say this is right and who's going to oppose it. And from that, he'll decide what to put in his final report.
Wow. Father Spadaro also quotes Cardinal Schönborn, Christoph Schönborn, to build his argument that the sacraments are being offered or could be offered to divorced and remarried Catholics. This is a quote from his column. Cardinal Schönborn, interviewed by our magazine before the Synod, had affirmed that there are situations in which the priest confessor who knows the persons in the internal forum can come to the point of saying, quote, your situation is such that in conscience, in your and my conscience as a pastor, I see your place in the sacramental life of the Church. Concerning access to the sacraments, Spadaro goes on, the ordinary synod has therefore effectively laid the foundations, opening a door that at the previous synod had instead remained closed. On the contrary, 1 year ago, it had not even been possible to certify by qualified majority the debate on the issue, which had in fact taken place. Therefore, one may rightly speak of a new step. Edward Penton, what's been the reaction to this in Rome?
Well, I mean, it's obviously caused quite a stir for the reasons I just said, but also it's important to remember that, as Father Spadaro said, the Pope, this was rejected at the last synod. It's important to remember that it didn't get a qualified majority, this issue. And as Father Spadaro said, it was closed at the last synod, but now it's opened because the Pope wanted to carry it over to this synod and keep the debate alive, even though it was essentially rejected by the Synod Fathers. So that's obviously causing problems. And also just to remember also that Father Spadaro is editor of La Civiltà Cattolica, which has always been a very influential Jesuit magazine. And it's influential because it always has had to get the sort of imprimatur of the Secretariat of State, not only the Secretariat of State now, but also the Pope himself. So that's also what's giving us extra weight.
I see.
But as I said earlier, I think it's basically flying a kite and seeing just who's opposing it and who's not.
It's a trial balloon then.
But I think there will be quite a bit of pushback.
We're talking about a trial balloon then, right?
Yes, basically, yes. That's what it seems to be. And also connected with other comments the Pope has made since the Synod, which which have kind of pushed us along, this
Yes.
sort of reform agenda.
I want to get into some of those comments. Father Spadaro was quite clear in quoting the Pope in his column, and he quotes the Pope to undergird his argument. This is one of the quotes in his column. The Church should be one that questions herself with regard to her fidelity to the deposit of faith, which does not represent for the Church a museum to view, nor even something merely to safeguard, but is a living source from which the Church shall drink to satisfy the thirst of and illuminate the deposit of life. And then he quotes this from a daily Mass homily in October. The Pope says, "Times are changing, and we Christians must change continually. We must change whilst remaining fixed to our faith in Jesus Christ, fixed to the truth of the gospel, but we must adapt our attitude continuously, according to the signs of the times." Now, Edward, as you said, nothing is published in this Jesuit magazine without the Holy See Secretariat of State screening it. Is the Pope steadily preparing the Church for change in the year of mercy on this issue?
Well, that seems to be the consensus, that he certainly wants to push this. But again, it all depends on whether he can get it through without too much opposition. I think he wants to do it with, obviously, the majority support of bishops. But if there is a big outcry, then I don't think he will. But it's very much, it's been like this, as we know, for 2 years. We don't know really what the Pope really wants. We can only speculate. But there is this sense in Rome, I think, among a lot of people that, it's getting to the point where they've had enough of this sort of cat and mouse game, and they want to know what the Pope really thinks.
Where the Pope
so
stands.
the sooner this apostolic exaltation comes, the better, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yesterday, the Vatican, moving on to something slightly different, the Vatican announced that 2 journalists are facing criminal investigations because they published books on Catholic Church scandals based on leaked documents. What is going on here, Edward Penton? And as a journalist, one who has also reported and uncovered at times uncomfortable things and happenings in the Church, are you concerned about journalists being investigated for reporting what third-party sources are giving them?
Well, this is a bit of a concern, that's true. And the way that the Vatican has sort of come down on the journalists, as well as those 2 who are arrested, has caused quite a bit of concern, because none of them have been tried, but they're being tried by public opinion, if you like. They're being put out there by the Vatican. The names are being broadcast, and they're basically being sort of, some would say, being very much, tried before a proper trial. They're sort of guilty before being proven innocent, and that's concern to people. But it does show the depths to which the Pope is really trying to reform these things, and how concerned he is about reforming the Vatican finances, and that anything that gets in the way of that, or is perceived to get in the way of that, he's wanting to sort of come down hard on. So there is that, and people I've spoken to who are really pushing this reform and important to it, they didn't like this either, and they thought the journalists were basically whipping up old stories which have been kind of addressed already, and probably for whatever motives we don't know, but they say it's not helping the reform process.
I don't have any problem with any institution, well, the White House, Congress, or the Vatican, or the UN, or anybody, trying to close down leaks. But to do that, you lean on your own people in your organization. You don't target journalists. And I worry a bit when we hear Sandro Magister, who was sort of, cast into the outer darkness for releasing the encyclical, Laudato Si, before publication date, but he was given that by a third party. I don't see how that's foul in journalistic terms.
No, well, this is a very good point, Raymond, and also there seems to be a double standard at work here, because you've got the letter of the 13 cardinals, of course, which was leaked. It was a private letter. It was leaked to Andrea Tornielli, who is very close to the Pope. In fact, he's got a book coming out, a book interview with the Pope coming out in January. But there's been no repercussions. There hasn't been any reprimand for that. In fact, there's been no investigation. I've asked Father Lombardi twice if he could confirm whether there's been some investigation into that leak, but I've heard no answer. So, it seems to be a sort of, if the leak is not favoured, then they come down hard on it. But if it seems to be in the Pope's interests, then it's all fine and okay. So I think there's a problem there, which I think weakens and undermines the Pope's authority and his willingness to sort of come to terms with these leaks. I think that sort of needs to be addressed.
Interesting point. Final question. In response to the Vatileaks scandal, Pope Francis gave a talk to the Italian Bishops' Conference this week. He suggested that the Church had to stop clinging to conservatism and fundamentalism as a defensive response to problems it faces. He said the Church ought to be bruised, hurting, and dirty instead of obsessed with money and power. I'll read you this quote quickly, and then I want your reaction. Quote, "Before the problems of the Church, it is not useful to search for solutions in conservatism or fundamentalism, in the restoration of obsolete conduct and forms that no longer have the capacity of being significant culturally. Christian doctrine is not a closed system incapable of generating questions, doubts, interrogatives. But it is alive, knows being unsettled. It does not have a rigid face. It has a body that moves and grows. It has a soft flesh. It is called Jesus Christ." What is the Pope trying to say here, Edward Penton?
It is. I mean, I think it's first of all important to look at the context. He is talking to the Italian Church, and the Italian Church has a history of being very sort of established and very close to the power, channels of power and money as well. And I think that's part of it. But at the same time, it does give an insight into how the Pope is trying to sort of push this reform agenda through the Church. And we've heard this before, you know, he thinks the sort of conservatism, or rather what he calls rigidity to doctrine, is a problem, and he sees that as an obstacle to reform. But critics, you know, will say, well, you've got to have doctrine as the basis of any reform, and any reform should in fact deepen and help come to a better understanding of doctrine. So there is this problem here with what he's trying to put across, and I don't think many people are on board, or many people are on board, but many people also aren't, and I think that's problematic going forward. But again, it just gives a better insight into what the Pope's vision is, and also what he might put in his post-synodal apostolic exhortation. I think it's going to be fairly similar, or at least he's going to be trying to put in similar things to what he said to the Italian Church.
Very good. Edward Penton, the Year of Mercy is just weeks away. We'll see how far that extends, and we'll check in with you as it develops. Edward is the author of The Rigging of a Vatican Synod. That ebook is available online at Ignatius.com, Amazon.com, and elsewhere. All his reports are at the National Catholic Register. Edward, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Aaron.
Before we go, you may remember our segment a few weeks ago. It concerned the University of Texas football legend. There's a terrific new film opening this week that you may want to see. My All-American is the story of UT great Freddie Steinmark, from his humble beginnings growing in Colorado to gridiron glory in Austin and the fight of faith for his life against cancer. Take a look.
You wanted to see me, Coach?
I made Iron Mike watch a season worth of film. You got his attention.
We got 200 players fighting for a spot on a 100-man roster.
Double time, let's go!
Hope Coach is right about you. Yes, sir. Football doesn't build character. It eliminates the weak.
Freddie Steinmark not only was a great player, he had the will to win, he was tenacious, he's a fighter, but he inspired others to be great.
Steinmark took a big hit and looks like he might be hurt.
I see you trying to hide your limp on the field. Don't act like you're not in pain. I know you.
You all right? Fine.
Your leg, I think we have to have somebody take a look at it.
A couple of possibilities.
I promise, Coach, I will not let you down. I want to play in the Cotton Bowl.
Anyone who has to deal with challenges that can shake your own mortality, and that people can still say he was the best guy I ever knew, you know that there's something special about that person. And that's why his spirit lives on, and that's why people are still talking about him, and that's why there was a movie based on him, because there was something other and unique and immortal about him.
There is nothing my boy can't do.
That boy's never backed down against nothing or nobody, and he won't now. He's gonna need all of you.
Whatever you are going through, I am going through.
Can you hold up one more game?
Whatever it is, you will meet the challenge.
My All-American stars Aaron Eckhart and Finn Wittrock. It opens in theaters everywhere on November 13th. If you're looking for role models for your sons, this is a film for you. It's a classic American story of faith and family, and worth your time. Well, that's all the time we have, and we thank you for spending it with us. Before I go, a very special happy 21st anniversary to my darling Rebecca. There's not even going to be a cause for her sainthood. She's just going to go straight up after this anyway. I love you, honey. Until next week, the show continues on Facebook and Twitter. Like me on Facebook, follow me on Twitter. The links are at RaymondArroyo.com. You can also find a link there to order the first book of my supernatural new children's adventure series, Will Wilder and the Relic of Perilous Falls. That's coming in March. You can also sign up for my free e-blast, and don't miss next week's show. Iron Chef and James Beard Award winner Chef John Besh joins us to share his tips for turning your kitchen table into a family table. Best-selling author George Weigel will also be here, and I have another surprise for you. But you'll have to tune in next week to find out what it is. Until then, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, thanks for watching. I'm Raymond Arroyo from Washington, D.C. We'll see you next time. Bye now.